1 of the fantasy baseball season. And here's a few hitters I'd look to drop this week. The first guy is Rosario of the Cleveland Indians. Rosario was a recommended ad a few weeks ago while he was red hot, but right now he's really slowed down over the last week here is Rosario. But on the season, still pretty solid numbers. 8 home runs, 44 RBIs, 12 stolen bases, 65 runs scored, a 283 average, and a 324 on base. But the last week here for Rosario, for him, 3 runs, no homers and RBI, a 167 average, and a 222 on base. So right here, we know Rosario's a free swinger. He don't really work counts. And right now, pitches over the last week here have really mowed Rosario down where he's only 4 for 24. And obviously, he's not a guy that's going to give you much power. He's not a guy that's going to steal an astronomical amount of bases. So right now, I don't think he's really worth the roster spot if he's not going to hit for batting average, because everything else he really isn't that great at for fantasy baseball purposes. The last few games for Rosario: August 24th versus Texas, 1 for 3 with a run. August 25th versus Texas, 0 for 3. August 26th versus Texas, 1 for 4 with an RBI. August 27th versus Boston, 1 for 4 with a run. August 28th versus Boston, 0 for 5. And August 29th versus Boston, 1 for 5 with a run. So right here, he's pretty much hasn't done much, like I mentioned, in the last couple weeks here. And he's not a guy that's going to hit for high power, like I mentioned. He's not going to drive in tons of runs. And he's not going to steal a lot of bases. So right now, this week, I think he's an easy drop, is Rosario, even though I know he qualifies at shortstop, which is a tough position to fill this season. The next hit is Kyle Farmer of the Cincinnati Reds. To talk about a guy with versatility in fantasy baseball. Kyle Farmer is the definition of it this season. He qualifies at catcher, first, second, third, and shortstop. But right now, he's really struggled over the last couple weeks here as Farmer. On the season, 11 home runs, 47 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, 46 runs, a 254 average on the season, and a 311 on base. But the last couple weeks here, he's pretty much been non-existent for fantasy owners. No homers, 4 RBIs, 2 runs scored, a 190 average, and a 205 on base percentage. So right there, those numbers aren't going to get the job done. And he's only got 2 hits in his last 6 games here, is Kyle Farmer. So he's definitely slumping. He's definitely struggling. And he might be even hitting the wall as well, because throughout his career, he hasn't had this many at-bats this deep into the season. So the last few games for him, August 24th, at Milwaukee, 1 for 4 with an RBI. August 25th at the Brewers, 1 for 3. August 27th at the Marlins, 0 for 4. August 28th at the Marlins, 0 for 4. And August 29th at the Marlins, 0 for 4. So right here, a lot of 0 fors for Farmer. I know the versatility is hard to give up in fantasy baseball with a guy who could play the whole infield, including catcher, obviously. But right now, if he's not producing, even if he plays 5 different positions, he's not worth a roster spot, in my opinion. And right now, he's a hitter I would drop. The next hitter is Rhys Hoskins of the Philadelphia Phillies. So Rhys Hoskins, he was having a pretty good season, but right now, it's been announced the other day he's out for the season. He's going to need abdominal surgery, is Hoskins. So he finished the season 27 home runs, 71 RBIs, 64 runs scored, 247 average, and a 334 on base. So if Hoskins stayed healthy the whole year, because he had another stint as well before that on the injury list, he could easily hit 35 to 40 home runs, in my opinion. So next season, Hoskins, I expect him to be one of the better power-hitting first basemen for fantasy baseball, and he'll bounce back, in my opinion. He plays in a small ballpark in Philly, and this year was a good year to see him with the power numbers especially, and almost a 250 batting average. So right now, I don't know why he's still owned in 63% of fantasy leagues while his season's over. Unless you're in a keeper league, you're going to keep him, a different story. But all redraft leagues, there's no point of holding on to Hoskins at this point. And he's a player I definitely would drop this week, obviously, being out for the year. The next hitter is Josh Rojas of the Arizona Diamondbacks. So Rojas, he was one of the hotter hitters over the month of July here for fantasy baseball. But he's really cooled off. But on the season, 11 homers, 38 RBIs, 56 runs scored, 7 stolen bases, a 273 average, and a 353 on base in the last couple weeks here for Rojas. No homers, 6 RBIs, 2 runs scored, a 222 average, and a 263 on base. So right now he's been dropped in 2% of fantasy leagues, but he's still owned in 43%, which I think is a little high here for Rojas. I know he's another versatile hitter that qualifies at second, short, and outfield here for fantasy baseball, but he's been non-existent as well over the last couple weeks. August 24th at Pittsburgh, 2 for 5. August 25th at the Pirates, 0 for 5. August 26th at Philly, 1 for 5 with an RBI. August 27th at Philly, 1 for 5 with a run and a rib. August 28th at Philly, 0 for 4. And August 29th at Philly, 1 for 5. So right here, that's just not cutting it, in my opinion, because obviously he's not a big power bat. He's not a big base stealer. And if he's not hitting for average and getting on base, he's pretty much non-existent for fantasy baseball. And right now, I would drop Rojas in the fifth and final hitter. I would drop this week's his teammate, Dalton Varshall of the Arizona Diamondbacks. So Varshall, he qualifies as catcher and outfield, and he was a hot pickup a few weeks ago in fantasy baseball, but his numbers have cooled off, and it's been a pretty bad season overall for him. 9 homers, 25 RBIs, 28 runs scored, 4 stolen bases, a 225 average, and a 322 on base. But the last couple weeks here for Varshall, 3 homers, 6 RBIs, 6 runs scored, a 257 average, and a 297 on base. So he's picked up the pace just a bit. But like I mentioned, he's not doing much for fantasy owners. There's better options that I would play at the catcher position, because I doubt many people are using him as a utility guy or outfielder with all the type of guys you could put at those positions. They're using him as a catcher, but right now a few catching guys have definitely come up and are better options than Varshall, in my opinion. So the last few games for him: August 22nd at the Rockies, 3 for 4, a homer, 4 RBIs, 2 runs scored. August 23rd at Pittsburgh, 1 for 4 with a homer. August 24th at Pittsburgh, 0 for 4. August 25th at Pittsburgh, 0 for 4. August 26th at Philly, 1 for 3 with a run. August 27th at Philly, 0 for 4. August 28th at Philly, 1 for 3. And the 29th, he didn't play that game. So right now, Varshall, he's not a player doing much. Still owned in 38% of fantasy leagues, but he's a player I would drop this week. So that's a few hitters I would drop here in week 21 of the fantasy baseball season.